The formula is gone, vanished. And for over 800 years, the most terrifying weapon ever created has remained nothing more than a legend whispered in the halls of history. Greek fire. The name alone sent Byzantine enemies fleeing in terror, abandoning their ships before the flames could reach them. But here's what nobody tells you. This wasn't just fire. Fire, you understand. Fire behaves. This was something else entirely. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever heard of a weapon so feared that enemies would rather drown than face it. You're standing on the deck of an Arab warship in the year 678. The Mediterranean stretches endlessly around you, dark water reflecting moonlight. Your captain is confident. You've got numbers, superior ships, and the wind at your back. Constantinople will fall tonight. Then you see it. A strange tube mounted on the Byzantine ship ahead, bronze glinting in the torchlight. Someone points, shouts. But it's already too late. A stream of liquid fire erupts from the tube, arcing through the night air like a dragon's breath made real. It hits the water between the ships and keeps burning. The sea itself is on fire. You watch, paralyzed, as the flames spread impossibly across the waves, defying everything you know about how the world works. The heat reaches your face from 50 feet away. Men are screaming. Some jump overboard to escape the approaching inferno, only to find themselves swimming through burning water. The liquid clings to their skin, to their clothes, to the wooden hull of your ship. Water doesn't put it out. It makes it worse. The flames burn brighter, hotter, spreading faster wherever the waves carry it. Your ship is engulfed in minutes. Those who survive tell stories that sound like madness. Liquid fire that burned on water, that couldn't be extinguished, that stuck to everything it touched like some kind of ancient napalm. For 700 years, Greek fire remained the Byzantine Empire's ultimate trump card. Their enemies had superior numbers, better tactics, more resources. None of it mattered when the fire tubes came out. Naval battles ended before they began. Sieges broke when defenders poured Greek fire from the walls. It wasn't just a weapon, it was psychological warfare perfected. Here's where it gets truly fascinating. The Byzantines guarded this formula like nothing else in human history. Only the imperial family and a handful of trusted scientists knew the recipe. They didn't write it down, couldn't risk it. The secret passed from emperor to emperor, father to son, spoken in whispered conversations behind locked doors. When Constantinople finally fell in 1453, the secret died with it. Now think about that for a second. An entire civilization's most valuable military asset, and they protected it so well that it completely vanished from human knowledge. Modern scientists have been trying to recreate Greek fire for centuries. They've analyzed ancient texts, studied burn patterns on archaeological sites, experimented with every combination of ingredients available in the Byzantine world. Nothing works quite right. Oh, they can make things that burn on water. Petroleum-based mixtures, phosphorus compounds, thermite reactions, but none of them match the historical descriptions. None of them explain how Greek fire could be sprayed from handheld tubes, stored for months without degrading, or burn with that distinctive bright white color that survivors described. Some researchers think it was a combination of petroleum, quicklime, and sulfur. The quicklime would react violently with water, igniting the petroleum and creating that unstoppable burning effect. Others argue for naphtha mixed with pine resin and potassium nitrate. A few bold theories suggest ingredients we haven't even considered, chemical reactions lost to time. But here's the thing that keeps historians awake at night. Every proposed formula has problems. The petroleum theory doesn't explain the pressure system needed to spray it. The quicklime theory? Too unstable to store safely. The naphtha theory? wrong color flames according to eyewitness accounts. It's like trying to reverse engineer a smartphone using only descriptions from people who saw it once in the dark. You've got pieces of the puzzle, but the picture won't come together. Byzantine sources deliberately obscured the details. When they mentioned Greek fire at all, they used vague terms, religious language, mystical descriptions designed to confuse. One text calls it liquid fire, another describes it as artificial fire, a third claims it was made through prayer and divine intervention. Helpful, right? The manufacturing process was equally secretive. We know there was a special facility in Constantinople, guarded day and night. We know certain ingredients arrived under armed escort. We know the chemists who worked there took oaths of silence, punishable by death if broken. What we don't know is what actually happened inside those walls. Archaeological evidence hasn't helped much either. Greek fire installations don't leave clear traces. Unlike forges or pottery kilns, there's no distinctive structure to excavate. The chemical residue has long since degraded. Even shipwrecks that might have carried Greek fire weapons show nothing conclusive after centuries underwater. Modern military researchers have taken their own crack at the mystery. During World War II, both Allied and Axis powers studied Greek fire, hoping to recreate its devastating effectiveness. They had access to industrial chemistry, unlimited resources, and detailed historical research. They failed. Cold War weapons programs revisited the question. Napalm came close in some ways, but it wasn't the same. It didn't burn on water the way descriptions indicated. It didn't have that same adhesive quality that made Greek fire stick to wet surfaces and keep burning. You want to know the really frustrating part? The Byzantines themselves eventually lost the formula. By the year 1200, references to Greek fire become sporadic. The weapon that had saved Constantinople countless times just fades from the historical record. Whether it was lost during political turmoil, whether the secret keepers died without passing it on, whether the formula degraded over generations of oral transmission, we'll never know for certain. What we do know is that by the time the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople in 1204, Greek fire was already becoming legendary rather than practical. The Crusaders searched for the formula. They tore apart libraries, interrogated survivors, offered massive rewards. They found nothing. Some historians think fragments of the knowledge survived in different forms. Medieval Arabic texts mention sea fire and other similar weapons. Chinese sources describe fire lances and flamethrowers that might share some technological ancestry. Byzantine refugees fleeing to Europe might have carried partial knowledge with them, but if they did, it never coalesced back into the full formula. The complete recipe, the exact proportions, the precise manufacturing technique, gone. And here's what makes this more than just an interesting historical footnote. Greek fire represents something we rarely acknowledge in our modern world. We assume knowledge moves in one direction, forward, always accumulating, never truly lost. We stand on the shoulders of giants and all that. Greek fire proves that's not always true. Sometimes giants fall and take their knowledge with them. Sometimes the shoulders we thought we could stand on just aren't there anymore. An entire branch of chemistry, advanced enough to create something we still can't fully replicate, just vanished. Imagine if tomorrow we lost the ability to make semiconductors. Not the factories, not the raw materials, but the actual knowledge of how to do it. Future generations would know we had computers, smartphones, microchips. They'd have descriptions, photographs, maybe even broken examples to study. But if the crucial knowledge disappeared, they'd struggle to recreate it from scratch. That's Greek fire. But this is just the beginning. Because while the Byzantines were perfecting liquid fire, metal workers halfway across the world were creating blades that seemed to defy the laws of physics itself. Steel that could slice through European swords, bend without breaking, and hold an edge sharp enough to split falling silk scarves. And just like Greek fire, the secret died with its creators. The blade bends completely in half without breaking. You watch, holding your breath, as the merchant demonstrates. He releases the pressure, and the sword springs back to perfect straightness. No warping, no stress marks. Just impossibly flexible steel that moments later can slice through a rifle barrel with a single strike. This is Damascus steel, and by every law of metallurgy you understand, it shouldn't exist. The distinctive watery pattern ripples across the blade's surface like flowing silk frozen in metal. Light catches those swirling lines, creating depth that seems to move as you shift your angle. Medieval crusaders called it the devil's metal. They watched their own swords shatter against these eastern blades and assumed witchcraft, dark magic, pacts with demons. The simpler explanation was somehow worse. The Muslims were just better at making steel. Not slightly better, catastrophically, embarrassingly, impossibly better. You're a European knight in 1191, standing on sun-baked ground outside Acre. Your sword is the finest money can buy. Toledo steel, forged by masters, blessed by priests. It cost more than a farm. You've trained with it since childhood, know its balance like you know your own hands. Then you meet a Saracen warrior, carrying a curved blade with those telltale watery patterns. Yours breaks, snaps clean through like it's made of pottery. You're standing there holding a useless piece of metal, while your opponent's blade remains perfect, untouched, still sharp enough to shave with. Stories of Damascus steel spread like wildfire through crusader camps. Blades that could cut through stone. Swords so sharp they could split a hair lengthwise. Steel flexible enough to tie in a knot, then straighten out for battle. European smiths heard these tales and called them exaggerations, propaganda, impossible boasts from Eastern merchants. Then they saw the blades themselves and realized the story's undersold reality. The steel came from India originally, raw material called wuts that arrived in Damascus as small cakes of crystallized metal. Syrian smiths would heat these cakes, hammer them, fold them, work them through processes that transformed good steel into legendary steel. But calling it a process makes it sound systematic, replicable, scientific. It wasn't. It was closer to alchemy than metallurgy. Each master had their own technique, passed from father to son in workshops where outsiders never entered. The forge temperature had to be exactly right, not hot enough to measure with instruments. Blacksmiths judged heat by color, by feel, by instinct developed over decades. Too hot and the crystal structure collapsed. Too cool and the metal wouldn't properly bond. The difference between perfection and failure was maybe 50 degrees, judged by eye alone in a room full of smoke and flame. The hammering rhythm mattered. Specific patterns of strikes, certain sequences of folds, particular ways of working the metal that affected the final crystal structure in ways we still don't fully understand. Master smiths could hear when the steel was ready. The ring of hammer on metal told them things microscopes would reveal centuries later. Chemical additives played crucial roles nobody wrote down. Organic materials, minerals, substances added at precise moments in precise amounts. Some texts mentioned special water used for quenching, others reference particular types of charcoal. A few describe covering the blade in specific clays or animal fats before the final heating. Why? What did these additives do at the molecular level? Your guess is as good as anyone's. Modern metallurgists have studied Damascus steel with electron microscopes, spectrographic analysis, every scientific tool available. What they found is absolutely wild. The steel contains carbon nanotubes, structures that shouldn't exist in medieval metalworking, that require modern nanotechnology to produce deliberately, except there they are, woven through Damascus blades forged 800 years ago. The crystalline structure shows patterns of cementite nanowires, creating natural composite armor at the molecular level. These nanowires form along the blade's edge, creating zones of different hardness that make the steel simultaneously flexible and incredibly hard. It's a materials science miracle, achieved by people who didn't know what molecules were, how, trial and error over centuries. Lucky accidents that got preserved in tradition. Divine intervention, like some smiths claimed. Nobody knows. The visible watery pattern isn't decorative. It's a map of the underlying crystal structure, revealing the boundaries between different phases of steel. Those flowing lines show you exactly where the metal is hardest, where it's most flexible, how the forces will distribute during impact. It's functional art where the beauty tells you about the physics. European smiths tried desperately to copy these blades. They bought Damascus steel swords and attempted to reverse engineer them. They captured Muslim smiths and tortured them for the secrets. They sent spies to infiltrate workshops. Nothing worked. Oh, they could make pattern-welded blades that looked similar, fold different grades of steel together, create pretty surface patterns. But the performance wasn't there. The legendary flexibility, the edge retention, that perfect balance of hardness and toughness, it remained stubbornly Eastern. Then around 1750, Damascus steel production suddenly stopped. Not gradually declined, just stopped. The last true Damascus blades were forged, and then the knowledge evaporated. Smiths in Damascus kept working, kept making swords, but the special properties were gone. The watery patterns became shallow imitations. The performance dropped to merely excellent instead of supernatural. What happened? Best guess. The source of wrought steel from India dried up. Specific mines that produced ore with the exact right impurity profile were exhausted. Without that precise starting material, even perfect technique couldn't reproduce the results. It's like trying to bake the same cake with different flour. Close doesn't count in metallurgy. Alternative theories suggest the knowledge was deliberately destroyed. Political upheaval, religious conflict, guild secrets lost when master smiths died without proper apprentices. Maybe the oral traditions got corrupted, crucial steps forgotten or misremembered. One generation's precise technique becomes the next generation's vague guideline. By 1800, Damascus steel had joined Greek fire in the realm of lost wonders. Museums had examples. Collectors paid fortunes for authentic blades, but nobody could make new ones. The Industrial Revolution arrived with its scientific metallurgy, its temperature gauges and chemical analysis, its systematic approach to steel making. Surely modern science could crack a medieval mystery. Right. Wrong. For 200 years metallurgists failed to recreate true Damascus steel. They made excellent steel. Sure. Spring steel, tool steel, stainless steel, advanced alloys that exceeded Damascus in specific properties. But that combination of flexibility and hardness, that distinctive crystal structure with its carbon nanotubes and cementite nanowires, it stayed lost. In 1998, a materials scientist named J.D. Verhoeven finally reproduced something close. He used wrought steel with specific trace elements, carefully controlled heating cycles, precise forging techniques informed by microscopic analysis of ancient blades. The result had the watery pattern, the nanowires, some of the legendary properties. But even Verhoeven admitted his reproduction was educated guesswork. He didn't know if medieval smiths did exactly what he did. He'd reverse engineered a result, not recovered a process. And here's the kicker. His technique is too expensive and complicated for practical use. Damascus steel remains a historical curiosity, rather than a viable modern material. We have better options now, engineered alloys designed with computers and manufactured with precision equipment. So why does losing Damascus steel matter? Same reason Greek fire matters. It proves that human knowledge isn't a steady accumulation. Sometimes we reach peaks of practical expertise that later generations, even with superior theoretical knowledge, can't match. Medieval smiths couldn't explain the chemistry of what they were doing. They didn't know about crystal structures or carbon diffusion or phase boundaries, but they could feel it in their hands, hear it in the hammer strikes, see it in the flames. That intuitive mastery, built through generations of incremental refinement, achieved results that centuries of scientific analysis struggle to match. Knowledge isn't just information, it's practice, tradition, the 10,000 small tricks that never get written down because they seem too obvious to mention. When that chain breaks, you can have all the information in the world and still not know how to actually do the thing. But forget blades and fire for a moment, because the Romans were building with a material so advanced that their structures still stand 2,000 years later, while modern concrete crumbles after 50 years. The dome shouldn't be possible. You stand beneath it, craning your neck back, doing the math in your head. 143 feet of unsupported concrete, spanning the Pantheon's oculus, weighing 4,000 tons, built in the year 128. Still standing, still perfect. Modern engineers look at this building and quietly panic because they're not entirely sure how to replicate it. The Pantheon's dome remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever built. Not the largest ancient dome, the largest dome, period. 2,000 years of architectural advancement, computer modeling, materials science, and we still can't improve on what the Romans achieved with hand tools and empirical knowledge. That concrete should have cracked centuries ago, should have degraded, spalled, collapsed under its own weight. Instead, it's gotten stronger with age. Here's where you need to pay attention, because this gets weird. Modern concrete has a lifespan of maybe 50 to 100 years in ideal conditions. Bridges built in the 1960s are crumbling now. Parking garages need constant maintenance. That shiny new building downtown, it's already slowly deteriorating, microscopic cracks spreading through the foundation. Roman concrete, improving with time. Marine structures built 2 millennia ago are harder now than when they were constructed. Breakwaters and harbor installations show increased strength, enhanced durability, better resistance to erosion. Scientists examining these structures find them in better condition than functionally identical modern constructions built 50 years ago. You're a Roman engineer in the year 113, overseeing construction of Trajan's market. Your concrete recipe seems simple enough. Volcanic ash from Pozzuoli, near Mount Vesuvius, lime made from crushed limestone, seawater for mixing, chunks of volcanic rock as aggregate. Mix it together, pack it into wooden forms, and wait for it to cure. Except that simple recipe is doing things that won't be understood for 2,000 years. The volcanic ash is key. Not just any volcanic ash, specifically pozzolana from the Bay of Naples. This stuff contains a perfect blend of silica and alumina that reacts with lime and seawater to form extraordinarily stable compounds. The Romans didn't know about chemical reactions or mineral structures. They just knew this particular ash made better concrete than anything else. Trial and error over generations identified the best quarries, the optimal mixing ratios, the right curing times, knowledge built through countless failed experiments that nobody bothered recording because failure wasn't interesting. Only success got written down, and even then, barely. Most of what we know about Roman concrete comes from one source. 1. An architect named Vitruvius wrote a treatise on building techniques around 15 BC. 10 books covering everything from materials to methods to aesthetics. His section on concrete is frustratingly vague. Use pozzolana, mix with lime, add aggregate. That's basically it. Imagine trying to bake a cake from a recipe that says mix flour, eggs and sugar, then cook it. Technically accurate, completely useless. Vitruvius assumed his readers already knew the details, the proportions, the techniques. Why write down what every builder learns as an apprentice? Except those apprenticeships ended. The knowledge embedded in daily practice vanished. By the 6th century, Roman concrete construction had largely stopped. The expertise faded as the Western Roman Empire collapsed. Medieval builders in Europe used stone or brick. The few who tried concrete made inferior versions, missing crucial steps or ingredients. The institutional knowledge that produced the Pantheon was gone. Fast forward to the 18th century, Europeans rediscover concrete, reinvent it from scratch using different materials and methods. Portland cement, developed in 1824, becomes the global standard. Strong, reliable, consistent. Also completely different from the Roman formula. Portland cement is calcium-based. It cures through drying, losing water over time. This creates microscopic cracks. Water seeps in, freezes, expands. Rebar rusts. The structure slowly degrades. It's still amazing stuff. It built the modern world, but it doesn't last the way Roman concrete lasts. Roman concrete cures through a chemical reaction with seawater, growing stronger as salt water penetrates the structure. Instead of cracking, it heals itself. Modern scientists discovered this self-healing property by accident while studying ancient Roman breakwaters. They expected to find degraded, weakened concrete, eaten away by 2,000 years of saltwater exposure. Instead, they found dense, strong material that had actually improved. Microscopic analysis revealed something stunning. The concrete was still actively reacting. Seawater filtered through tiny cracks, dissolving some of the volcanic material and redepositing it as interlocking crystals. Tobermorite, a rare aluminum-based mineral, was forming inside the concrete, filling voids and binding the structure tighter. The ocean was making the concrete stronger. This is completely backwards from modern materials. Our concrete deteriorates in salt water. Marine construction requires special treatments, protective coatings, constant maintenance. Roman harbor installations just sit there getting better. One pier in Caesarea has been underwater for 2 millennia. Core samples show it's denser and harder than when first built. The volcanic ash contains a specific type of glass that reacts with seawater over decades and centuries. Slow chemical processes create new mineral structures that reinforce the original material. It's like the concrete is alive, constantly repairing and strengthening itself. Why did the Romans use seawater instead of fresh water? They didn't document the reason. Maybe it was convenient for marine construction. Maybe they noticed better results and kept doing it without knowing why. The chemical understanding came 2,000 years later, but the practical results were obvious enough to preserve in tradition. The aggregate choice mattered too. Romans used chunks of volcanic rock rather than uniform gravel. These irregular pieces created a heterogeneous structure that distributed stress better than modern concrete's uniform composition. Cracks couldn't propagate easily through the variable material. They'd hit a piece of volcanic rock and stop or deflect. Modern structural engineers are now trying to reverse engineer this durability. The potential is enormous. Concrete is the most used material on Earth besides water. We produce 10 billion tons annually. If that concrete could last centuries instead of decades, the economic and environmental impact would be staggering. Several research teams have created Roman-style concrete in labs. They've confirmed the self-healing properties, the Tobermorite formation, the incredible durability. They understand the chemistry now in ways Vitruvius never could. But here's the problem. It's not economical. Roman concrete takes longer to cure than modern Portland cement. Years instead of days for full strength. Construction schedules can't accommodate that. The volcanic ash needs to be exactly right, not just any pozzolana, but the specific type with the proper chemical composition. The stuff from Pozzololi works. Ash from other volcanoes, not so much. There are modern substitutes, coal fly ash and other industrial byproducts, that approximate the chemistry. But the performance isn't quite the same. Close enough for some applications, but not for building a pantheon. So we're stuck in this strange position. We understand Roman concrete better than the Romans did. We can explain exactly why it works at the molecular level. We can make it in laboratories, and we still can't practically replicate their achievements. The Pantheon's dome remains the benchmark, unsurpassed after 2,000 years. Knowledge and capability aren't the same thing. The Romans had capability without full knowledge. We have knowledge without full capability. Different kinds of expertise, equally valuable, both essential. What we lost wasn't information. It was culture, economic systems, institutional continuity. You can't just hand someone a recipe for Roman concrete and expect them to build the Pantheon. You need training systems, supplier networks, quality control, design traditions, construction techniques, an entire civilization's accumulated expertise. When Rome fell, that ecosystem collapsed. The recipe survived in Vitruvius's writing, but recipes alone aren't enough. It's like having sheet music but no instruments, no training, no tradition of performance. You know what the song should sound like. You can't play it. Here's what keeps researchers up at night though. If we lost concrete, what else did we lose? Roman concrete is dramatic, visible in massive structures that still dominate skylines. But what about smaller innovations, everyday technologies that didn't leave obvious archaeological traces? How many other superior techniques vanished without anyone noticing? And while Romans were perfecting concrete, in a completely different part of the world, someone was building batteries. The clay pot sits in a museum display case, unremarkable at first glance. 5 inches tall, terracotta brown, the kind of vessel you'd use for wine or oil, except there's a copper cylinder inside, corroded green with age. An iron rod runs through the center. Asphalt seals the top. And when archaeologists first tested it in 1938, they realized this 2,000-year-old clay pot could generate electricity, the Baghdad battery. Either evidence of ancient electrical knowledge that shouldn't exist, or the most persistent misidentification in archaeology. Your Wilhelm Koenig, German archaeologist working in Iraq in 1938. The National Museum of Iraq's storage rooms are packed with artifacts, decades of excavations gathering dust on shelves. You're cataloguing Persian period objects when you spot these strange pots, a dozen of them, all similar construction. Terracotta vessels, copper cylinders, iron rods. Some still contain traces of acidic residue. Your mind makes a connection. You studied electrochemistry in university. This configuration, it's a galvanic cell, a battery. The realization hits like ice water. These objects are from Parthian Persia, dated between 150 BC and 650 AD. They predate Alessandro Volta's invention of the battery by 2,000 years. If Koenig was right, everything we know about the history of electricity needs revision. If he was wrong, we've spent 80 years obsessing over ancient storage jars. The problem is the testing. When researchers created replicas and filled them with acidic solutions like vinegar or wine, they generated voltage. Not much, half a volt, maybe 1 volt, depending on the electrolyte. Enough to cause a mild tingle if you touch both terminals. Definitely enough to prove the concept works. But working doesn't mean that's what it was for. A mousetrap makes an adequate paperweight, doesn't mean that's its purpose. The ancient electricity theory gained traction fast. Popular imagination loves the idea of advanced ancient technology, Mesopotamian electricians, Persian batteries powering lost machines, secret knowledge suppressed or forgotten. It fits a narrative we find compelling. Maybe the ancients were more sophisticated than we give them credit for. Some researchers proposed the batteries were used for electroplating, coating objects in gold or silver using electrical current. That's theoretically possible. We've found Parthian artifacts with thin, even metal coatings that could indicate electroplating. Connect several Baghdad batteries in series, get enough voltage for basic plating work, except we've never found wires, connectors, or any infrastructure you'd need for systematic electroplating. No workshops with multiple batteries set up. No evidence of the chemical knowledge required. Just isolated pots scattered across archaeological sites, with no clear context. Alternative theories emerged. Maybe they stored sacred scrolls, the copper protecting parchment from moisture. Maybe they held medicinal compounds, the metal leaching into liquids for therapeutic use. Maybe they were just storage vessels that happened to have this configuration for completely unrelated reasons. Here's where it gets frustrating. The original artifacts were housed in the National Museum of Iraq, prime specimens, the best preserved examples, crucial for definitive testing. Then 2003 happened. The museum was looted during the Iraq War. Many artifacts disappeared, including most of the Baghdad batteries. Some were recovered later, damaged, others vanished completely. Now we can't perform modern analysis on the best evidence. The remaining examples are scattered, poorly documented, impossible to study comprehensively. What we're left with is conjecture based on incomplete information about objects we can't properly examine. Maddening for researchers who crave definitive answers. A few batteries remain in museums, behind glass, tantalizing and inconclusive. Skeptics make valid points. If the Parthians had batteries and understood electricity, why is there zero textual evidence? No mentions in records, no descriptions in technical manuals, no casual references in literature. Electricity is pretty noticeable. Someone would have written about it, unless it was sacred knowledge, restricted to priests or specialists, secret enough that it never entered common knowledge. That explanation feels convenient though, unfalsifiable. Any absence of evidence becomes evidence of secrecy, not exactly rigorous methodology. The electroplating theory has similar problems. Yes, we have Parthian objects with thin metal coatings. We also have multiple other ways to achieve that effect. Fire gilding, mercury amalgamation, gold leaf application. All techniques we know ancient cultures used. Why assume a complex, poorly evidenced electrical method when simpler explanations exist? Occam's razor suggests the simplest explanation is usually correct. Storage jars are simpler than ancient batteries. But then why the specific configuration? Copper cylinder, iron rod, acidic residue. That's a lot of coincidences to dismiss. If they're just storage vessels, why this exact design repeated across multiple examples? The mystery deepens when you look at similar finds. Other ancient cultures show hints of electrical knowledge that might not be coincidental. Egyptian texts mention tingling sensations from certain fish, electric catfish, that generate shocks. Could they have harnessed that? Probably not, but they noticed the phenomenon. Greek philosophers wrote about static electricity. Thales of Miletus described how rubbing amber created attractive forces. The word electricity comes from electron, Greek for amber. They didn't understand what they were observing, but they observed it. Baghdad batteries might represent practical application of principles others only noticed theoretically. Or they might be jars. The evidence doesn't conclusively prove either direction. What we can say for certain is that the configuration works. Fill them with acidic liquid, you get electricity. Whether anyone 2,000 years ago actually did that, or recognized what was happening, or used it for anything, that remains speculation. Some researchers have built battery arrays, connecting multiple replicas to increase voltage. You can get enough power to electroplate small objects, light up primitive bulbs, even create mild shocks. Demonstrations of what's possible, not proof of what happened. The most honest answer is we don't know. The Baghdad battery sits in this uncomfortable zone where it's too sophisticated to dismiss, but too poorly documented to confirm. It challenges our assumptions about ancient technology while resisting definitive interpretation. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that ancients had batteries or didn't have batteries, but that our knowledge of the past is fragmentary and full of gaps. We find an object, apply modern understanding, and construct narratives that might be completely wrong. Koenig saw a battery because he knew about batteries. A different archaeologist might have seen something else entirely. Context matters enormously in archaeology. These pots were found in various locations, often in secondary contexts where their original use isn't clear. Without controlled excavations and detailed records, we're guessing about purpose based on form. Here's what bothers serious archaeologists about the battery theory. It's based on what's possible, not what's evidenced. Yes, the configuration can generate electricity. Lots of things can do things they weren't designed for. That's not proof of original intent. The Baghdad battery has become more famous than it deserves, elevated by popular media into evidence of advanced ancient technology. It makes better television than the truth, which is probably mundane storage vessels we don't fully understand. But, and this is important, we can't completely rule out the electricity interpretation either. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially for organic materials and practices that leave minimal archaeological traces. If Parthians used these for electroplating and it was a specialized craft, we might never find definitive proof. So the Baghdad battery remains unresolved, a tantalizing possibility that refuses to become certainty. Unlike Greek fire or Damascus steel, where we know the capabilities were real, this one might be our own modern perspective projected onto ancient objects. Or it might be proof that someone figured out electrical principles 2 millennia before Volta. We genuinely don't know. And sometimes in archaeology, that's the most honest answer you can give. The mystery persists, residing in museum cases and academic debates, probably forever unresolved, unless someone finds an ancient Parthian technical manual with wiring diagrams. Don't hold your breath. But while we argue about batteries that may or may not have existed, there's something we know absolutely worked because we pulled it from the ocean floor. A device so sophisticated it seems like science fiction. An ancient computer that calculated the cosmos. The corroded lump doesn't look like much. Bronze encrusted with 2,000 years of marine growth, crushed and fragmented by time and pressure. When Greek sponge divers pulled it from a shipwreck off Antikythera Island in 1901, nobody paid much attention. Just another artifact in a cargo hold full of statues and pottery. Then someone noticed the gears, dozens of them, precisely cut, interlocking, arranged in complex mechanical relationships. Inside what appeared to be a worthless chunk of corrosion was the most sophisticated mechanical device that would exist for another 1,000 years. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient analog computer designed to predict astronomical positions and eclipses decades in advance. And we almost threw it away. You're a sponge diver in April 1900, working the waters off Antikythera. Your team discovers a shipwreck in 150 feet of water, Roman cargo vessel that sank around 60 BC. The wreck is packed with treasure, bronze statues, marble sculptures, glass vessels, coins. You spend months salvaging everything valuable, hauling artifacts to the surface. Among the cargo is this odd corroded mass, roughly the size of a shoebox. It gets loaded with everything else, shipped to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, stored with hundreds of other objects awaiting study. Months later, the thing splits open as the wood inside dries and contracts. Someone notices gears visible in the crack. That's when everything changes. Gears shouldn't exist in ancient shipwrecks. Basic mechanical principles, sure. Levers, pulleys, water screws. But precise gear trains with differential mechanisms. That's medieval technology at the earliest. What you're looking at shouldn't be possible for another 1300 years. Early researchers assumed it was an astrolabe, ancient navigation instrument, known technology. Nothing too shocking, except astrolabes don't have 30 interlocking bronze gears arranged in multiple layers. They don't have spiral dials and inscriptions describing planetary movements. They don't predict lunar eclipses. This was something else entirely. Decades of study followed. X-rays revealed more gears hidden in the corrosion. Inscriptions emerged describing astronomical functions. Slowly, painstakingly, researchers reconstructed what this device actually did. It calculated the positions of the sun, moon, and planets. It predicted eclipses using the Saros cycle, a 223-month pattern. It showed the timing of the Olympic Games. It modeled the irregular motion of the moon with startling accuracy, all mechanically. No electricity, no digital processing. Just bronze gears translating rotational input into complex astronomical output. The front dial showed the Egyptian calendar and Greek zodiac. Turn a crank on the side, and watch pointers move across the dial, tracking celestial bodies through the sky. The back had 2 spiral dials, predicting eclipses, and calculating the 4-year Olympic cycle. The precision is absurd. Gear teeth cut to tolerances of a few hundredths of a millimeter. Differential mechanisms that wouldn't appear again until the 16th century. A level of mechanical sophistication that suggests this wasn't the first attempt. You don't build something this complex without generations of development behind it, which raises the terrifying question, if this is what survived, what didn't? The Antikythera mechanism wasn't discovered through archaeology carefully excavating a workshop. It's a random survival from a shipwreck, one mechanism among tens of thousands that must have existed. If this level of technology was sophisticated enough to put on a ship, to risk losing, to apparently produce in some quantity, what was the cutting-edge stuff? What were the masterworks that didn't survive? Modern researchers used CT scanning and 3D modeling to map every fragment. They found inscriptions too small to read with the naked eye. Operating instructions, essentially. An ancient user manual explaining which dials showed what information, how to interpret the readings, what the various scales measured. Someone built this device for actual use, not as a demonstration model or religious object. It was a practical astronomical calculator with real applications. The mathematics behind it are equally impressive. Ancient Greek astronomy was sophisticated. We knew that, but translating mathematical models into mechanical gears requires a completely different skill set. You need to understand gear ratios, how to distribute forces, how to compensate for the moon's elliptical orbit using purely mechanical means, that differential mechanism on the back. It calculates the moon's varying speed across the sky by combining 2 separate rotational inputs. The mathematical principle is straightforward. The mechanical implementation is genius-level engineering, and someone did it 2,000 years ago with hand tools. The shipwreck dating tells us this mechanism was built around 150 to 100 BC, probably on Rhodes. Rhodes was a center of astronomical research and mechanical engineering. Posidonius, a renowned philosopher and scientist, worked there. Hipparchos, who discovered the precession of the equinoxes and created star catalogues, was also active on Rhodes. The island had the knowledge base to produce something this advanced. But we have zero written records of such devices existing. No descriptions in surviving texts. No mentions by ancient authors. Nothing. How do you hide technology this significant? Maybe we're looking at it wrong. Maybe gear-based astronomical calculators were common knowledge, so obvious they didn't need extensive documentation. Like how modern sources rarely explain how smartphones work because everyone knows. Future archaeologists finding one iPhone among ruins might assume it's unique, when really millions existed. Except we've never found another Antikythera mechanism, not even fragments. Gears occasionally show up in archaeological contexts, but nothing approaching this complexity. It genuinely seems to be a one-off survival, which suggests either they were rare even in ancient times, or we've been extraordinarily unlucky in what survives. The technology disappeared completely. Roman engineering texts don't mention gear computers. Medieval European mechanisms are vastly simpler. Arab astronomical instruments from the Islamic Golden Age show sophistication but different approaches. The specific knowledge that created the Antikythera mechanism just vanished. By the time complex gearwork reappears in Europe around 1400 with mechanical clocks, it's developed independently with no connection to ancient predecessors. We reinvented gear trains from scratch because the earlier tradition died. What's maddening is that we still don't fully understand it. The mechanism had at least 30 gears. We've identified most of their functions, but some gear arrangements remain mysterious, their purpose unclear. Fragments are missing. Relationships between components are ambiguous. Modern reconstructions work. They produce correct astronomical predictions, but we're not certain they match the original design exactly. We're reverse engineering based on fragments and informed guesswork. Several research teams have built working replicas. These devices actually function, calculating astronomical positions mechanically just like the original would have. You can turn the crank and watch eclipse predictions appear. See planetary positions update. It's breathtaking to watch ancient technology operate again after 2 millennia. But here's the thing. We built those replicas using modern machine tools, computer modeling, and complete understanding of astronomy and mechanics. Could we build one using only ancient technology? Bronze casting, hand filing gears, no precision measuring instruments? Probably not to the same tolerances. Which means the ancient craftsmen who made this possessed practical skills we've lost. They could feel or hear, or somehow sense precision that we need digital calipers to achieve. That's not better theoretical knowledge. It's superior practical technique, developed through experience rather than calculation. The same pattern we've seen with Greek fire, Damascus steel, Roman concrete, ancient makers who couldn't explain the science but could execute the practice flawlessly. Different epistemology, equally valid. The Antikythera mechanism proves ancient technology wasn't primitively simple. It shows sophisticated mechanical engineering, complex mathematics translated into physical mechanisms, precision manufacturing, and design thinking that wouldn't look out of place in a modern engineering firm. All achieved without the scientific method, without calculus, without the theoretical frameworks we consider essential. What else could they do? If they built analog computers, what other advanced devices existed? The archaeological record is brutally incomplete. Organic materials decay. Metal gets recycled. Most of human history left no permanent trace. We're working with maybe 1% of what existed, and from that fragmentary evidence trying to reconstruct entire technological traditions. It's like assembling a jigsaw puzzle when 99% of the pieces are missing, and you don't have the box showing the final picture. The glass glows purple in afternoon light, a color that shouldn't exist in ancient Rome. You're examining a piece of the Lycurgus cup, a 4th century drinking vessel that appears jade green under reflected light, but glows brilliant ruby red when light passes through it. This dichroic property requires nanoparticle engineering. Particles of gold and silver, precisely 50 to 100 nanometers across, suspended in the glass matrix at exact concentrations. Roman glassmakers were working with nanotechnology 1500 years before we had the term. They couldn't see the particles creating this effect. They definitely couldn't measure them. But somehow they knew exactly how to make this glass, this specific impossible color that modern materials scientists struggle to replicate. The Lycurgus cup isn't unique in being inexplicable. It's just the most dramatic example of a broader pattern. Ancient technologies that worked through principles their creators didn't understand. Results achieved through practice when theory was centuries away. We've covered the famous examples already. Greek fire burning impossibly. Damascus steel bending impossibly. Roman concrete lasting impossibly. But those are just the visible peaks. The archaeological record is littered with smaller mysteries, techniques that vanished without explanation. Tyrian purple, the royal dye of the ancient world, extracted from sea snails through a process so laborious that purple cloth cost more than gold. The dye was color-fast, permanent, grew richer with age and sunlight exposure. Modern attempts to recreate it produce similar colors but not the same light fastness or deepening quality. We're missing something in the process, some step that seemed too obvious to record. When the last Phoenician dye makers died, their expertise died with them. The recipe survived in vague terms. Collect murex snails, extract the glands, process in specific ways, but the ratios, the timing, the subtle variations based on weather or season, gone. We can make purple dye, we can't make Tyrian purple. Stradivarius violins present the same frustration. Antonio Stradivari made instruments between 1680 and 1737 that remain unsurpassed. Musicians pay millions for these violins because they produce tonal qualities modern luthiers can't match. Researchers have analyzed everything: wood density, varnish composition, construction techniques, aging processes. They've replicated the designs precisely. The sound is close, not the same. Something about Stradivari's process, possibly the wood treatment or varnish application, created acoustic properties we can approximate but not duplicate. The knowledge was in his hands, his judgment, his accumulated experience. When he died, it departed. We have his violins. We don't have his expertise. Samurai swords show similar patterns. Japanese swordsmiths achieved hardness levels in folded steel that modern metallurgy finds remarkable. The blades combine hard, sharp edges with flexible, tough spines through differential heat treatment. We understand the principle now. Heat the edge hotter than the spine during quenching. The rapid cooling makes the edge hard and brittle, while the spine cools slower, staying flexible. Simple concept. Execution requires knowing exactly how hot, exactly how long, exactly what medium to quench in. Those specifics came from centuries of accumulated practice. Modern smiths can make excellent katanas. The legendary old blades still command reverence because they represent peak mastery of the tradition before it was disrupted. You're starting to see the pattern, right? It's not that ancient people were smarter or had secret knowledge. They had time. Generations working on specific problems, incrementally refining techniques through trial and error, knowledge accumulated slowly, preserved in apprenticeship systems where you learned by watching and doing, not from books or formulas, from practice. When those traditions broke, The knowledge evaporated. Books preserve information, not skill. You can write down every step of making Damascus steel and still fail at it, because the text can't capture the sound of proper hammer strikes or the feel of correctly heated metal. Oral traditions carry this embodied knowledge better, but they're fragile. One interrupted generation, and centuries of refinement vanish. Stained glass provides another example. Medieval European cathedrals have windows in colors modern glass makers can't quite duplicate, particularly the blues, deep, luminous, somehow internally lit blues that modern glass approximates but doesn't match. The recipes existed: cobalt for blue, copper for green, gold for red, but the exact mixtures, the specific firing temperatures and durations, the subtle process variations that produced those transcendent colors, lost. The Gothic cathedrals remain. The windows glow with their impossible blues. Modern restoration requires matching those colors. Chemists analyze the original glass, identify the compounds, recreate the mixtures. The results are close. Glass that looks right in photographs passes casual inspection, but stand in Chartres Cathedral with light streaming through the original medieval glass, and then compare it to modern replacements. You can see the difference. The old glass has depth, luminosity, a quality that's difficult to articulate but impossible to miss. Something about the imperfections, perhaps. Medieval glass wasn't uniformly mixed. Variations in thickness, tiny bubbles, slight irregularities in chemical composition. These defects create complex light interactions, refracting and reflecting in ways that perfect modern glass doesn't. We eliminated the flaws and lost the beauty they created. Or maybe it's the materials. Medieval glassmakers used wood ash for alkali content, different trees, different regions, different ash compositions. Modern glass uses chemically pure sodium carbonate, consistent, reliable, boring. The trace elements in wood ash, the regional variations, the subtle complexity of natural materials versus refined chemicals that might be what we're missing. Except we've tried making glass with wood ash. Still not quite right. There's something else. Some interaction of factors, some process detail that contemporary sources didn't record because everyone already knew it. Chinese porcelain mystified Europe for centuries. Pure white, thin, translucent ceramic that Europeans couldn't reproduce. They knew it came from China. They knew it involved special clay. They desperately wanted to make it themselves because porcelain commanded insane prices. Alchemists and potters experimented for decades. They created beautiful ceramics, valuable in their own right. Not porcelain. Not that specific combination of thinness, translucent strength, and pure white color. The secret was kaolin, a specific type of clay that forms from weathered granite. Chinese potters had access to high-quality kaolin deposits and had refined the processing techniques over centuries. Temperature control was crucial. Porcelain requires firing at extremely high temperatures, sustained precisely. Too cool and the clay doesn't vitrify properly. Too hot and it deforms. Chinese kilns achieved this control through design and practice. European kilns couldn't match it. When Europeans finally cracked porcelain in the early 1700s, it was through industrial espionage and experimental chemistry. They reverse-engineered the result, but developed it independently. Chinese traditional knowledge and European scientific knowledge converged on the same material through completely different paths, both valid, both effective, different epistemologies producing equivalent results. Here's what unites all these lost technologies. They represent peak optimization within their contexts. Damascus steel was the best possible result from available materials using available techniques. Roman concrete was optimized for Mediterranean construction using local resources. Greek fire was the ultimate chemical weapon achievable with ancient chemistry. These weren't intermediate steps toward something better, they were culminations, finished expressions of technological traditions that had reached maturity. When those traditions ended, we didn't build on them. We started over with different approaches. Modern steel is better than Damascus steel for most applications, but we didn't get there by improving Damascus techniques. We developed completely different metallurgy. Modern concrete is more versatile than Roman concrete, but we achieved it through different chemistry, not by perfecting their formula. We're not standing on the shoulders of these ancient giants. We're standing on different giants entirely, looking across at achievements we can admire but can't quite reach. The question that haunts researchers is simple. What else did we lose? These technologies survived in archaeological records because they left durable traces. Bronze mechanisms, concrete buildings, steel blades, glass vessels. What about technologies using organic materials that completely decayed? What about techniques that left no physical evidence? The historical record we have is incredibly biased toward what survives. Stone and metal persist. Wood, cloth, leather, paper, mostly gone. If ancient cultures achieved breakthroughs in textiles, pharmacology, agriculture, food preservation, any field where the evidence would decay, we'd never know. We're looking at a heavily filtered subset of ancient capability and already finding things we can't fully replicate. The complete picture probably contained far more sophistication than we imagine, and that realization leads somewhere uncomfortable. Our assumption that knowledge progresses linearly is demonstrably false. Sometimes it circles back, sometimes it gets lost completely and has to be rediscovered. Sometimes we take different paths that are parallel rather than superior. The 19th century idea of inevitable progress, constant improvement, standing on accumulated knowledge, it's too simple. Real history is messier. Knowledge is fragile. Traditions break. Expertise dies with practitioners. You're standing in the ruins of the Library of Alexandria, except you're not, because the library is gone, burned, destroyed, its contents scattered or lost across centuries of conflict and neglect. Estimates suggest it held over 400,000 scrolls at its peak. Mathematical treatises, astronomical tables, engineering manuals, medical texts, philosophical works, the accumulated knowledge of the ancient Mediterranean world. A fraction survived in copies made before the destruction. The rest vanished. How much did we lose? We'll never know. That's the point. You can't catalogue what no longer exists. Can't assess the value of knowledge you don't have. We find references in surviving texts to books that no longer exist. Tantalizing mentions of works on architecture, mechanics, chemistry, authors citing sources we can't verify because the originals disappeared. It's like seeing someone's bibliography for a paper you can't read. The knowledge that created Greek fire was probably written down somewhere. The techniques for Damascus steel likely existed in instructional texts. Roman concrete mixing ratios were certainly documented in more detail than Vitruvius provided. We just don't have those sources. They're gone, burned, decayed, lost in the countless disruptions that mark human history. Libraries burned, cities sacked, civilizations collapsed. Each time, knowledge disappeared. Some was recreated later. Much wasn't. The destruction is ongoing. The Baghdad National Museum lost thousands of artifacts in 2003. Many recovered, many still missing. Each lost artifact is data we can't retrieve, questions we can't answer. The Taliban destroyed the Bamiyan Buddhas in 2001. Gone. ISIS demolished Palmyra. Gone. These aren't just cultural losses, they're data destruction. Archaeological evidence that could answer questions about ancient engineering, construction techniques, artistic methods. Every natural disaster, every war, every act of deliberate cultural destruction removes pieces from an already incomplete puzzle. We're trying to understand ancient technology with fragmentary evidence that gets more fragmentary every year. Climate change threatens archaeological sites globally. Rising sea levels will inundate coastal settlements. Changing weather patterns accelerate decay. Sites that survived 2,000 years might not survive the next 50. What bothers researchers most is the unknown unknowns. The technologies we don't know we lost because they vanished completely. No examples survived. No texts mention them. They existed, functioned, then disappeared without trace. How many? In what fields? We can't even estimate intelligently because we have no data. It's not like losing your keys where you know what's missing. It's like losing keys you didn't know you had to locks you didn't know existed. Maybe ancient cultures had sophisticated pharmacology based on plants now extinct. Maybe they developed mathematical techniques that weren't preserved. Maybe they solved engineering problems in ways we haven't considered. Pure speculation, but not unreasonable speculation. If the Antikythera mechanism survived only because of a fortunate shipwreck, how many similar devices didn't survive? If Damascus steel remained legendary because a few blades made it to Europe, how many other metallurgical achievements stayed regional and left no trace? We're working with survival bias on an epic scale. The historical record shows us what survived, which is a tiny non-representative sample of what existed. The question isn't whether we lost ancient technologies. Obviously we did. The question is how much we lost and whether we've lost things that would be valuable today. Greek fire probably wouldn't change modern warfare. We have better incendiaries, but the chemistry might reveal interesting approaches to combustion. Damascus steel won't replace modern alloys, but understanding how ancient smiths achieved those nanostructures without modern tools could inform materials science. Roman concrete offers real advantages for specific applications. Marine construction in particular could benefit from self-healing concrete that improves with seawater exposure. The Antikythera mechanism demonstrates that mechanical analog computers can perform complex calculations. In an age worried about electromagnetic pulses and digital fragility, that's not irrelevant. Lost ancient technologies aren't just historical curiosities, they're existence proofs. Demonstrations that problems can be solved in multiple ways, that different approaches can reach similar or superior results. When we assume our current methods are optimal, we stop looking for alternatives. Ancient technologies prove alternatives existed, maybe still exist, waiting to be rediscovered or reinvented. The real value isn't in recreating Greek fire or Damascus steel exactly. It's in understanding that knowledge can be lost, that progress isn't guaranteed, that preservation requires active effort. We're living through another potential knowledge bottleneck right now. Digital storage feels permanent. It's not. File formats become obsolete. Storage media degrades. Companies go bankrupt, taking their proprietary systems with them. We're creating vast amounts of digital information with questionable longevity. How much of today's knowledge will be accessible in 2,000 years? Maybe all of it, if we're careful. Maybe none of it, if we're not. The techniques for reading 8-inch floppy disks are already becoming obscure. Data from the 1980s is harder to access than papyrus from ancient Rome because we can still read papyrus. Those old file formats. Good luck. We need emulators, legacy hardware, specialized knowledge to access data from 40 years ago. Imagine trying to read it 2,000 years from now. The lesson from lost ancient technologies is simple. Preserve actively. Document thoroughly. Don't assume knowledge will automatically persist. Create redundancy. Keep physical backups. Maintain multiple copies in multiple formats. It seems paranoid until you realize how much has already vanished. Greek fire lasted 700 years, then disappeared in a generation. Damascus steel survived centuries, then vanished when the ore source depleted. Roman concrete lasted as institutional knowledge for 500 years, then faded as the empire collapsed. These weren't fragile new technologies. They were mature, established, widely used techniques. They still disappeared. What makes us think our technologies are safer? We have better preservation methods now. Digital storage, global communication, redundant backups. We also have more ways to lose things. Format obsolescence, platform dependency, centralized points of failure. An electromagnetic pulse could erase vast swaths of digital knowledge instantly. A social collapse could render our technological infrastructure useless, even if the data survives. You can't read a hard drive without electricity, computers, and operating systems. Ancient scrolls just need light and literacy. There's something to be said for technologies that don't require supporting infrastructure. The human cost is worth remembering too. Every lost technology represents generations of human effort. Craftspeople who spent lifetimes perfecting techniques. Apprentices who learned through years of practice. Masters who achieved insights that died with them. When Damascus steel production ended, it wasn't just a technology that vanished, it was an entire community of expertise. Families who had worked metal for generations. The accumulated wisdom of centuries, gone. The last Roman concrete builders watched their civilization crumble, knowing their skills would die with them. The Byzantine chemists who made Greek fire carried the secret to their graves. These were people, real individuals with knowledge they couldn't pass on because the transmission systems collapsed. That's the tragedy beyond the technical loss. So what do we do with this information? First, appreciate that ancient people were clever, not primitive, not simple, not less capable than us. They solved problems with different tools and different knowledge frameworks. Sometimes their solutions were better than ours. Second, document everything. Assume nothing is too obvious to record. The obvious stuff is what gets lost because everyone thinks everyone else knows it. Write down the details. Preserve the tacit knowledge. Third, maintain diversity in approaches. Don't put all our eggs in one technological basket. Multiple paths to similar results create resilience. If one approach fails, others exist. Fourth, respect traditional knowledge. Just because we can't explain why something works doesn't mean it doesn't work. Sometimes practice precedes theory by centuries. Listen to the practitioners. And fifth, remember that knowledge is fragile. It requires active preservation, continuous transmission, supportive social structures. It's not automatically cumulative. Every generation has to choose to preserve what came before. When you think about lost ancient technologies now, don't just think about the cool factor. Greek fire burning on water, Damascus steel cutting through European swords, Roman concrete lasting millennia. Think about what was lost when those technologies disappeared. The knowledge, yes, but also the communities of practice, the experiential wisdom, the different ways of understanding the world. We recovered some of this knowledge through scientific analysis. We reverse-engineered Roman concrete. We theorized about Damascus steel. We studied the Antikythera mechanism until we understood it. But we did it backwards, from artifacts to principles. The original knowledge went from principles to artifacts. Different epistemology, possibly better suited to actual production. You started this journey thinking about lost technologies. You end it understanding that knowledge itself is a technology. It requires maintenance, preservation, transmission. It can break down, it can be lost, and recovering it isn't always possible. Next time you learn something valuable, think about how you'd preserve it. Not just writing it down, but truly documenting it so someone could recreate it from scratch. You'll realize how much we communicate through demonstration, through hands-on practice, through contexts that don't translate to text. That's what was lost with Greek fire and Damascus steel. Not just recipes but entire systems of knowledge transmission. We've covered 7 lost ancient technologies. Greek fire that burned impossibly, Damascus steel that bent impossibly, Roman concrete that lasted impossibly, the Baghdad battery that might or might not have generated electricity, the Antikythera mechanism that calculated the cosmos with gears, and the broader pattern of lost expertise in glass, dyes, metallurgy, ceramics. What unites them all? They worked, they achieved results, then they vanished. Some we've partially recovered through science, some remain mysterious. All remind us that human knowledge isn't a straight line upward, it's a tangled path with dead ends, lost trails and forgotten peaks. The ancient world knew things we don't, we know things they didn't. Different knowledge, equally valuable. If you gained something from this exploration, pass it on. Share this with someone who assumes the past was primitive. Show them the Antikythera mechanism, and watch their assumptions shatter. Knowledge persists through transmission. Every time you share something valuable, you're fighting against the entropy that destroyed the Library of Alexandria and scattered Damascus steel secrets to the winds. Sleep well, knowing you're slightly less ignorant about what we've forgotten, and slightly more aware of what we risk losing if we're not careful.